want to thank everyone for being patient with us. And Dr. Ayers, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Chairman Salmon, Ranking Member Sherman, Congressman Chabot, and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much for the invitation to appear before you on political and religious extremism in Bangladesh. I am honored to be part of this distinguished panel. My comments summarize my more detailed written testimony submitted for the record. Bangladesh has been in the news for terrible reasons. On March 30th, Washika Rehman was hacked to death in Bangladesh's capital city, Dhaka. The month before, Avijit Roy was hacked to death as he left the Dhaka book fair. In 2013, Ahmed Rajib Haider was hacked to death with machetes, also in Dhaka. All three were bloggers targeted by radical Islamists for their atheist views. These murders occurred in the context of political unrest, so I will offer a few words about the political and economic situation before returning to discuss Islamic extremism. Bangladesh's politics are hurting its economy. Bangladesh is a country of 160 million people, of whom approximately 90% are Muslim. Bangladeshi politics are polarized at the best of times, but particularly in the last 2 years. In last year's national election, one major party, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, refused to participate, which resulted in the landslide re-election of the Awami League. The BNP abstained because elections were overseen by the Bangladesh Election Commission rather than a neutral caretaker government. All efforts to mediate by Bangladeshis, foreign diplomats, and the United Nations failed. On January 5th this year, 1 year after the election, the BNP began renewed public strikes against the government, adding transportation blockades to its tactics. The BNP hopes that street pressure will achieve fresh elections, but public strikes in Bangladesh often result in violence. Since January 5th, more than 120 people have been killed. Contributing to the polarized situation, the BNP chairperson, Begum Khaleda Zia, faces graft charges and was effectively held under house arrest for weeks earlier this year. The government has cracked down on the opposition and on the media. And the ongoing International Crimes Tribunal, seeking accountability and justice for the horrible crimes committed during Bangladesh's liberation struggle in 1971, adds further fuel to this combustible mix. All of this is now hurting the economy. The IMF lowered its economic growth forecast for Bangladesh to 6%, noting that the resurgence of unrest in recent months is taking a toll on the economy. A World Bank official told the Los Angeles Times that the larger economic toll of political unrest could be as high as $2 billion. The garment industry, a major employer, is facing a 30 to 40% downturn in orders by one estimate. This is all linked to the instability arising from extreme political polarization. Islamist violence in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has come a long way since 500 bombs exploded simultaneously in nearly every district in the country in August 2005. Successive governments have focused on tackling terrorism and have been largely successful. Still, three disturbing developments bear watching. First, the Hifazat-e-Islam emerged as a force in 2013 with austere demands that included a blasphemy law with the death penalty, punishment for atheist bloggers who insult Islam, prevention of men and women from what they called free mixing, and ending of what they called an anti-Islam women policy. The second concern relates to the dispossessed Rohingya people. There have been reports in Bangladesh and in India that the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, responsible for the Mumbai attacks of 2008, have been trying to recruit Rohingya refugees. Third, the dramatic spread of the self-proclaimed Islamic State into South Asia and the announcement last fall of a new Indian subcontinent subsidiary of al-Qaeda have captured attention. In January, Bangladeshi authorities arrested 4 men suspected of Islamic State membership. Last September, a British citizen of Bangladeshi origin was arrested in Dhaka under charges of recruiting for the Islamic State. Recommendations for U.S. policy. I will provide 4, and more detail about my recommendations is in my written testimony. First, support the requested increase in resources focused on democracy and governance programs in U.S. assistance to Bangladesh, and consider supplementing further. U.S. assistance to Bangladesh has been concentrated in health, food security, and climate change. The resources available to provide democracy and governance support are small compared with the outlays for these 3 categories. They are also very small compared to our support for these categories in Pakistan. 2, continue and expand the growing U.S.-Bangladesh counterterrorism and security cooperation. This has been a very successful area. Bangladesh seeks our assistance, is trying to do more, and can benefit from our continued support. Relatively small amounts of assistance can go a long way, particularly on topics like community policing, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, and strengthening capacity within the justice system. 3, deepen security consultation with India about Bangladesh. Regular consultations covering security matters in South Asia should be continued and enhanced, especially given the developments discussed above, which India watches closely. And finally, 4, continue looking for ways to incentivize political reconciliation in Bangladesh. Finding a way to bridge the chasm between Bangladesh's 2 major political parties and the deep personal enmity that drives their differences has proven Sisyphean. The United States should look for positive incentives to emphasize more robustly, such as the prospect of a Millennium Challenge Corporation threshold program, should Bangladesh reach a better situation of governance and law and order. We should also continue to impress upon the Bangladesh government, as well as the opposition, the enormous opportunity cost to the country from its ongoing political stalemate. It is a country with a spirit of entrepreneurship and huge unrealized promise. A better political environment would position Bangladesh for great things. Thank you very much, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. And now members of the panel will have 5 minutes to ask questions. I'll begin with myself, but I'm going to use part of my 5 minutes to give the opening statement that I would have given had we not turned immediately to the panel. But this is part of my 5 minutes, so they can start the clock. Bangladesh has long represented a moderate secular nation, as has been stated, which has worked hard to pull itself out of extreme poverty. It's become an important security partner for the United States in the fight against terrorism and Islamic extremism in South Asia, as well as a partner on humanitarian assistance, peacekeeping operations, and maritime security. However, ongoing political turmoil has plunged the nation into a political security crisis. While some have said that in Bangladesh this is politics as usual, I'm afraid we are witnessing a troubling course of events. When I was in Dhaka before the national elections last year, I met with both Sheikh Hasina and Khalida Zia, and I had met with them before previously when I'd been there a number of years prior to that, met with both of them at that time, separately, both times. And it was evident at that time that both sides sat at really an impasse, which is still the case, unfortunately. Sheikh Hasina insisted provisions were in place to conduct a fair election. We know that didn't really happen. Following this past week's city council elections, we are now marred by evidence of irregularities and intimidation, and I'm concerned about the roiling violence that has increased since the beginning of the year and what this all means for Bangladesh's democratic tradition. I believe Bangladesh has great potential, as the chairman mentioned in his opening statement, but it has much standing in the way of its continuing progress, as we've heard here this afternoon. And I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony this afternoon. It's been very helpful to us. And the things that the panel members here heard, we will convey to our colleagues who didn't have the opportunity to be here this afternoon, and also through our staffs. We'll make sure that all the other members of the Foreign Affairs Committee are able to benefit from the testimony that we've heard here this afternoon, and their written testimony will be made available as well. Now for just a couple of questions. Excuse me. There have been a string of high-profile murders of journalists, as was mentioned, and bloggers, as well as mass killings and commuters and bus bomb attacks. Outside of these headline-grabbing events, what does the situation actually look like on the ground in Bangladesh, and how is it impacting the everyday life of the average person in Bangladesh? And if you could all just be very brief, I'll just go down the line, maybe start with you, Ms. Curtis, if I could.
Thank you. Yes, the political violence that occurred in January and February connected to the opposition protest demonstrations was very disruptive to the economy, to people's ability to get around, and what was particularly disturbing were the petrol bombings on the buses, and which caused hundreds of innocent bystanders to become burned or were killed. So this was particularly disturbing, I think, to the average Bangladeshi that this was occurring. With regard to the murders of the bloggers, I think this provokes a different kind of concern among the Bangladeshi people. The Bangladeshi people are proud of their Bengali traditions, and they've been a largely peaceful, moderate, pluralist society. So when extremists are trying to disrupt that environment in Bangladesh, I think people become very concerned. But I would just separate, there's a difference between those murders which were by Islamist extremist groups and the petrol bombings that occurred were part of the political violence that was as a result of the opposition protests.
Thank you. Rather than go down the line, I have less than a minute, so I'd never have a chance. I wanted to get to at least one more question. Let me give you another question, and I'll go to you, Dr. Reyes, and then down the line on this one. Is there any way that we can encourage the Awami League and the BNP to have constructive dialogue about alleviating the tension between those parties? What role could the United States or any of the neighboring countries, India or China or Burma or anybody else, play to facilitate these reconciliation? I know that may sound kind of pie in the sky. We would probably all like that to happen. Is there any possibility of that happening? Dr. Reyes?
Thank you. First of all, this is a problem that needs to be solved by Bangladeshis. It cannot be solved by outsiders. Having said that one, the United States, the international community has a role to play. Particularly, I think the 2014 is a missed opportunity for Bangladesh. It was wasted because there was a relative calm, and that opportunity should have been taken. And that's the one more thing is you have mentioned, and I think it is important to have the Indians having a role. India has a moral responsibility because it is the largest democracy, its neighbors, and also security concern because and a Bangladesh which is completely, if the security situation deteriorates, it is not going to help India in any way or fashion. So with those in mind, I think this is important to press upon these both parties that if it continues to be like this, continued violence perpetrated by parties is not going to help Bangladesh in terms of achieving its potential. And they need to do it, and that's why the interlocutors should be both domestic and international community. And the United States can do is to encourage other parties, such as India, such as the European Union, to be involved and engage with the parties for coming up with a solution.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to the others if we go to a second round, but I don't want to take up all the time, so I'll now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Sherman.
Thank you. Everyone in this room is dedicated to the people of Bangladesh, one of the poorest countries in the world, and so there's a natural tendency in focusing economic policy to focus on what's good for Bangladesh. Ms. Curtis advocated more imports from Bangladesh and more investment in Bangladesh by the United States, that investment basically being American companies figuring out how to make a big profit by creating a lot of jobs in Bangladesh rather than the United States. And so I'd like to be a voice to point out that for every that we have a 5-to-1 trade deficit with Bangladesh, that Germany exports 3 or 4 times as much to Bangladesh as we do, and that we would have tens of thousands of more jobs in the United States if we had a balanced trade relationship. I expect that trade relationship to get much larger, and I hope that the lopsided nature of it gets much smaller. Mr. Felchi, Fleshley, is it true that in Bangladesh they have free trade zones where labor unions are restricted?
I'm not 100% sure if they're restricted from the zones. We operated in a zone.
You operate in the zone.
Yeah.
I'm told that labor unions are actually prohibited in those zones. You don't know whether they are or not?
I'm not sure if they are or not.
But you know your own factories, of course, don't. Are you aware of any labor union operating in the zones?
Organizations that I've heard of. There's labor organizations that I've heard of operating within the zones.
Well,
I don't know if
labor organization is very different from a labor union. Dr. Riaz, the average parent in Bangladesh, if they want to send their kid to a secular school, is that provided for by the government free? Are there fees? Do you have to pay for your own students' books?
First of all, this is the major achievement in the past decade of Bangladesh is that they have provided education to everybody. anyone, and as a matter of fact, one of the major achievements is bringing the females, children to schools. This has
And
been-
it's
free.
free of any fee.
It
What
is
about books? Are the
it
books
is
free?
It is free for everybody.
And the books are free.
The books are free, and over the last years, we have seen that the books are provided to the students on time, which is excellent achievement. Before the school starts, they do get the books. So that has been an achievement of the government, and add to that over the years, over the decade actually, there are the females stipend provided, which encourage females to be in the school. So there has been significant
I would
achievement.
point out that one focus of our foreign aid could be to provide those books to the Bangladeshi government. That would give us some influence over content without going all the way to an American politically correct content, and that it's very hard to steal a book. Well, I mean, it's very hard for a corrupt official to make money stealing books as opposed to money. Doctor, Bangladesh is a low-lying country. Sea levels are likely to rise. How big a problem is that?
It is a major problem. It's a major problem because the environmental challenges. Bangladesh is at the forefront of the battle of the environmental, disasters that we are anticipating, and it was not making of Bangladesh. I mean, it is the front line of the environmental battle that the world should be fighting instead of leaving Bangladesh to fight only alone.
How much of its arable land is it likely to lose if we see a half a meter rise in sea levels?
There are variation in terms of some even predicted up to 1/3, but at least 10 to 13% of the low-lying lands might be lost if there is a sea level rise and the global warming, which would be a disaster. But let me take this opportunity just briefly that this is a battle of everyone's. Here or there, it is not only a battle of Bangladesh.
Dr. Rees, I only get 5 minutes. I'm going to move on to another question, if that's okay. My colleagues have heard me talk with passion about climate change. Bangladesh suffers from a dysfunctional two-party system. Climate of repression is worsening. Is there any way, short of a military takeover, to resolve the situation?
Military takeover is not a solution, as a matter
No,
of
I didn't
fact.
say
It
that
is-
was a solution.
So they have to. I mean, I am. At the end, I'm optimistic to that extent that the Bangladeshis are resilient. Bangladeshis have faced adverse situation and they have the ingenuity to come up with a solution. However, given the circumstances, that they will have to come up. Likelihood, if I say that, would I put my money on it at this point? No. But there is no way out of having a reconciliation, conversation, negotiation, and that is where the international community needs to help. Again, they cannot impose a solution, but they can facilitate, and that if it is not facilitated, our history tells elsewhere that obviously this is not going to end in anyone's favor. The loser will be Bangladesh.
Thank you.
Yeah, the gentleman's time has expired. We'll go ahead into a second round now, so I'll yield to myself for 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there, Tulsi. My bad. California, Ms. Tulsi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks all of you for being here. Follow up on Mr. Sherman's question. Given the political impasse that we're facing, what is the likelihood of a military intervention or takeover? And if that were to occur, how would you see that, given the dynamic now, how would you see that play out for whomever would like to answer?
I'll just say quickly, I think right now the chances of the military getting involved are pretty low, and I think that's because of the previous experience when they did take the reins of power in 2007 for nearly 2 years, and their image suffered from allegations of corruption. And so I think this has made them less likely to want to step in, unless, of course, things deteriorate significantly, violence increases tremendously, then perhaps they would consider. But I think right now they're not showing any signs of getting involved.
With regard to I know a couple of you spoke about the Islamic militancy or Islamic extremism that is there. To what extent do these groups have broader influence over the disaffected Bangladeshis or the broader community there?
I'll speak personally from my own experience. You know, and this was part of my oral testimony that I couldn't get to. You know, the issue that's at hand right now in Bangladesh is that the situation is so chaotic, and there is so much unknown, and there are so many people that feel lost and discouraged, that Bangladesh is turning into basically a breeding ground, if you will, for terrorist activity, ISIS, and God forbid, you know, ISIS were to grab hold of 170 million people, you know, and that's at a very key interchange in South Asia for the United States of America.
Yeah.
And so, as an American citizen, outside of business, as an American citizen, that scares me to death. That absolutely scares me to death, and it scares me for my friends and whom I would call family, that I have extended family in Bangladesh, because it's so easy. It's so easy when you're falling on tough times and you're discouraged to be recruited. So it's concerning.
Mr. Kansar, I know you were there and you met with some of the moderate Muslim leaders there. If you could share your experience both on how this situation is really affecting the day-to-day lives, but also what the moderate Muslim community is doing about this increased threat.
Thank you. In conjunction with Mr. Chabot's question, based on my observations of only being in Dhaka, unfortunately I could not travel to other parts of the country because it was just simply unsafe. The streets of Dhaka were completely empty. The traffic, there was virtually no traffic, and if anybody's been to Dhaka, they told me that that's a complete anomaly. It would take you hours to travel from 1 mile to another as opposed to the minutes, and so businesses were directly affected. Shops were completely shut down. And you could, also a concern was that 60 million students, because of the hartals, were prevented from taking their exams. That's almost disenfranchising economically an entire generation of Bangladeshis. And so this was a complete irresponsibility on the parties involved. With regards to the moderate Muslim leaders whom we met with, one gentleman named Imran Sarkar, who is a prominent secular activist, and he is a practicing Muslim, he described his trepidation with increasing Islamization of Bangladeshi society, saying that Islam had been imposed upon them as opposed to a free choice of choosing religion and how much religion should be a part of their daily lives. And the public school textbooks were also increasingly showing signs of radicalization by preferencing Islamic followers of Islam over other religions. And this had direct implications for communal harmony and religious freedom. And in an interview that he gave with the Business Standard, an Indian publication, he said that he is actually now under threat by Islamist forces. So moderate Muslim leaders are also under threat by the same by the same perpetrators of violence against Vijit Roy and Washiko Rahman.
Thank you. Dr. Ayers, I think you had wanted to add some comment on this.
I just wanted to say that I do think it's probably difficult to ascertain what percentage of the general population has a more radical view, and certainly Bangladesh has not been a radical country. It has been a place of great moderation. But the real issue here is that it only takes a few people to cause great chaos. So if you look at the kind of explosions that took place in 2005, you have a small cell that can affect something that's hugely consequential for the country. The murders of these 3 bloggers that have just taken place, you know, the people who have been arrested, small cells of 2 and 4 people. Again, who don't seem to be part of any sort of larger organized groups, sort of small groups, or, you know, directed by their cleric. That's a trial going on right now. Again, I do think there are people who are overall largely moderate, but there are small cells of people that we do need to worry about.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Young lady yields back, and again, my apologies there for the oversight. So we'll go into a second round. When I was last in Bangladesh, and it was shortly before the elections, on my way back, actually on the plane, I believe, I do a blog every week, and I happen to do it on Bangladesh since I had just been there. And interestingly enough, it's it got more hits, more people were interested in that particular blog than anything I've done in about 5 or 6 years that I've done the blog. Every week I do it. And so I'm not sure exactly why that is, but it's a fact. There's a lot of people, obviously, in Bangladesh, about half the population of the U.S. squeezed into a country about the size of Iowa, or even a little smaller than Iowa. So, you can still read that if you'd like to. It's on my blog. All the old ones are on there. Now, I do have an official blog and a political blog, and I keep that on the political blog, but it is there if you ever want to go back and read what I thought about this 2 years ago. The thing that struck me is that this was shortly before the election, and my understanding was the polling was showing that Khalida Zia was likely to win the election, but ultimately, they couldn't come to an agreement, and it seemed to be over the issue of a caretaker government. A lot of times in the past, there had been a caretaker government that took over, the elections were held so that you could make sure that one side or the other wasn't being unfair with the other side. And it seemed to work relatively well, but this time that didn't happen. So we see what we saw after the elections. I was actually a bit surprised that the violence wasn't even more after the election. But in any event, it is what it is. What role did that caretaker government versus not having one have in this election and what we ended up with? Dr. Ayers, would you want to comment on that?
Well, that certainly has been the most important point of dispute over the course of the last nearly 2 years, because the disagreement over how to carry out the election of January 5th, 2014, the run-up to that election, actually, this disagreement was well known. In fact, that was the period where you saw a lot of Bangladeshis trying to bring both parties together to discuss. There was a quite famous among Bangladeshis transcript of a telephone conversation that took place. Yeah, you probably read it at the time, yep. Where unable to even agree among the two leaders of the political parties who should call whom first. Really intensive enmity there. So they've continued to focus on this as the point of disagreement, when in fact, I mean, if they were to reach an agreement on some mechanism, whether it's an institutionalized Bangladesh election commission that adheres to all forms of free and fair elections, or a caretaker government, I mean, ultimately it doesn't matter what they choose as long as they agree and the elections are carried out in a free and fair and transparent manner.
Thank you. Dr. Or Mr. Fleischle, let me turn to you if I can at this point. Sometime, a few years ago, I don't remember the exact date, but two of the major items that were in the world news were the Rana Plaza garment factory collapse, where there were over 1,100 people, I believe, were killed, and another 2,500 were injured, and these were mostly women, is my recollection. And the other was the Tazreen fashion factory fire, and it was over 100, I think it was 117 that were killed, and another 200 plus were injured in that. And there was a lot of attention of the condition that a lot of these factories there were under, and the unsafe things. And the argument here was U.S. companies, if we're doing business and importing products, and we have a, if not a legal responsibility, a moral responsibility of making sure that that people that are making these products, which are ultimately coming here to the United States and purchased by American citizens, that we have a responsibility to make sure that it is safe. And you could argue who knew what when, and I'm sure that were all kinds of lawsuits involved in that. But what improvements or what changes were made as a result of those two horrific occurrences?
Well, I think initially, and even up until today, you've got two major groups that were formed. Right? You've got the Alliance and the Accord. One's on the European side and one is on the American side. Those two entities are made up of basically the largest retailers and the largest brands in the world. It took, I think, gathering that power, which is huge buying power, and they import billions of dollars from Bangladesh to be able to start the path to change and bring recognition to what's going on the ground in Bangladesh. As a CEO in Bangladesh back around between 2007 and 2012 approximately, we did business with the largest retailers. Our internal safety regulations were very strict. A lot of the safety and the security regulations that we had in place mirrored and or exceeded. I won't name the retailers, but the largest retailers that are out there. And luckily, because of me being American and me being face to face with the buyers all the time and the customers, and listening to what their concerns are, I was able to always ensure that when I was at the factory, I could physically inspect. I was more of a hands-on kind of CEO as opposed to the desk CEO. So I would walk the floors all the time. I would make sure that the fire extinguishers were there. I'd make sure that the doors were open, that we had plenty of escapes, and that we didn't have floors overloaded, and people couldn't trip on things on the floor, and it was very, very important for me to do that, because our business counted on it, and the people's lives counted on it, and that was pre Tazreen and Rana Plaza. So when those two events occurred, it was absolutely devastating, and I can feel the pain. And you're right, 90+% of the employees or the workers are female.
Thank you very much. My time's expired. Ms. Gabbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just ask one follow-up, just following up on the counterterrorism subject matter. I understand that Bangladesh's Rapid Action Battalion has been effective in counterterrorism efforts, but that they've also been known to be used by the government to attack political opponents. So I'm wondering if you can comment on how you can reach both objectives of curtailing the abuse of power, but also recognizing if this is an effective asset to counter these extremist elements. How do you see that playing out?
If you don't mind, I'll just make one quick comment. As it pertains to whether it's the Rapid Action Battalion or the military or even just the police, the police itself, generally speaking, from my understanding, is trained and funded here in the U.S., so by U.S. taxpayer dollars. Okay, a lot of the military is as well. The RAB, I believe, is done through the UN and heavily funded by the U.S. I wanted to give you an example. I was leaving a hotel in Chittagong, the Peninsula Hotel in Chittagong, one year, and it had in my van on the way to the factory 2 people from one of the largest retailers in the world, senior executives. And no more than 5 minutes after we left, and there was traffic then, the roads were absolutely packed, and it does take an hour to get a mile. One of the members of RAB, and you can clearly see him there in a blue uniform, it says RAB on the back of him, and I've been told that the elite of the elite out there took and beat the living you-know-what out of a normal, ordinary citizen because he crossed the street at the wrong time. Well, the buyers that was sitting next to me was like, what the was that? And I'll apologize. Let's discuss it a little bit later. And I'll tell you, it wasn't 3 months later that those buyers were barred from traveling to Bangladesh anymore. And so it's a very serious concern. Yeah. And I indirectly, we as Americans have an impact indirectly in how that happens.
Dr. Rios?
The most
Clarification, they were barred by the Bangladeshi government?
No. Barred by the corporation. And yeah. For their safety and security, correct.
in terms of RAB's record, we will have to take both these things, right? Their success in terms of dealing with, anti-terrorism, but also their human rights records is very poor, absolutely abysmal, that we need to take into account. And given the circumstances, the most important element is accountability, unless the force, or for that matter, any force, is accountable. And that you cannot tie in simply, one institution cannot be accountable when the whole system is not accountable. Right. And this is how it is, in some ways connected to each other. Overall point, that's why, is an accountable governance that is necessary, that would ensure that this kind of heavy-handedness or RAB's poor record of human rights abuse can be addressed to in institutional arrangement. And if I may, just quickly going back to what Dr. Ayers has mentioned in regard to this difference. The point is caretaker government or the election commission is mostly to have an institution that can protect your rights to vote in a free and fair manner. Caretaker government is not a solution. Solution is to build an institution which Bangladesh has not succeeded yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ars.
Just a quick comment on the question of the RAB. The United States government has been interested in trying to help RAB carry out internal reforms, and through the U.S. Department of Justice program has helped support a project to build an internal investigation capacity there. So there are programs that the United States can support to help Bangladesh reach more capable processes internally and help solve some of these problems. We've also supported police training programs. I visited the National Police Academy in Rajshahi a few years ago when I was serving in government, and we have supported programs that help train them to focus more on community policing instead of thinking about, use the stick first. Rather, treat the community as those you protect and serve, and issue the use of violence first. So there are methods we can use and support to try to bring about reforms.
Right. Dr. Riaz, your point is well taken, though, about accountability. If you don't have an institution set up where there is, transparency and justice and accountability, then there's still far too much room for abuse. Thank you.
Mr. Kansara, people say that as you move further east from the Middle East, that Islam gets more moderate, and that in any case Bangladeshis are moderate in their approach to Islam. Can you explain what has driven the recent ethnic persecution of Hindus, and how does the Hindu community in Bangladesh back one party or the other?
So answering the first part of your question initially, it's fairly well known that the Hindu community by and large will support the Awami League, because the Awami League has policy platforms that are set to roll back the Islamization of the country, the encroachments of Islam in the constitution. They have made it a party platform to roll back those restrictions on other religious communities. Now, with regards to moderate Islamic movements within the within South Asia, or Bangladesh in particular, specifically with regards to Jamaat, the Jamaat-e-Islami is a Muslim Brotherhood linked organization. They have direct ties. In fact, I believe Mohammed Morsi had visited Bangladesh while he was president of the Muslim Brotherhood and had met with Jamaat leaders there. And their brand of Islam is very similar to that of the Wahhabis and the Salafis, and they are simply interested in creating an Islamic state in Bangladesh. It's part of their charter, and it's part of their organization's methodology, and the attacks that they have perpetrated on the citizens of Bangladesh in conjunction with either banned terrorist organizations or other organizations like Islami Chhatra Shibir are set to intimidate the average Bangladeshi into being subjugated to that form of thought.
I mean, my own image is that Jamaat is at the fringes of thought in Bangladesh. Do these extremist views have widespread support, or are we talking about Hindus living in fear of a tiny extremist group that means them harm?
Based on our observations and interactions with Hindu community leaders in Bangladesh, Jamaat and Jamaat's ideology is growing amongst the general population. And I would say that Jamaat, it was palpable the financial power they have in Bangladesh. There's a list I found online before this hearing of over 20 financial insurance institutions, banks, and several other power-wielding organizations that Jamaat funds and finances. And that money, I don't think, is coming from the farms of Bangladesh. I think it's coming from foreign sources like Saudi Arabia or even Pakistan's ISI.
I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Fleischle, I'm going to ask my question directly at you. As some of the witnesses have noted, the World Bank estimates that the unrest in Bangladesh has had a cumulative negative effect of nearly $2 billion in just the last few years alone. So will companies continue to do business in Bangladesh if violence continues? That's my first question. Second, what, if anything, has the business community done to engage with the government to relay these concerns? And then, has the government been responsive? And then finally, if trends continue, what will the business community do? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. You know, to step back for a little bit, I saw a huge growth in the business from '07 to 2012. Most of that transferred from China and other countries. After 2012, it started to dwindle down. The past 2 years, it's dropping dramatically.
How do they keep that growth rate as 6.2% GDP growth rate with the dwindling?
To be honest, I have no idea.
Do you believe the numbers?
No.
Okay, go on.
Because I've been witness of a number of retailers that have moved mass amounts of orders outside of Bangladesh, places like Africa, Vietnam, Thailand, back to China again, where it's 3, 4, 5 times more expensive to make something. But they're doing that because of security. They're doing that for safety. They're doing that to ensure that they're going to get the goods. Right now, with the situation that's at hand, you can't even get product from Dhaka down to Chittagong where it needs to ship. It's almost impossible. And there's so many factories in Dhaka. There's lots of factories in Chittagong, but Chittagong relies on Dhaka for a lot of materials, right? While Dhaka relies on Chittagong to get the containers out. So unless things change, you're going to see a continual drop. And unfortunately, that goes back to the whole issue of people feeling like they're lost and disconcerted and everything, because you've got two parties that are warring with each other, and there's no answers that are coming up. Business is going away. Factories are closing. Retail shops are closing because they have nothing to sell in their shops anymore because they can't get goods from up the road. I fear, unfortunately, that if there are not immediate steps taken to improve the situation in Bangladesh, that Bangladesh will not be the growth opportunity that I know it can be and that it once was. And that's scary. Yeah.
So, other than your testimony today, what is the business community doing to relay those concerns to the government? Is there a dialogue going on?
As far as I know, they discuss with people in the different NGOs within Bangladesh. My goal as part of UTRA is to help engage some of those organizations, bring them in as membership, and help guide them through the process. And hopefully, if we can all build together a big enough group of support, maybe we can make that change. Maybe we can help.
Is there a very robust Chamber of Commerce, the American Chamber of Commerce?
It's not very robust.
No?
As far as I know. It's there, it's in place. I don't know that it's that active.
In the dialogue that the business community has had with the government, is it responsive at all? Do they give you any reassurances that they're trying to work on it or move in the right direction?
You hear many things.
Mostly excuses, or?
It's mostly just talk. Yeah,
Hype?
we're making these improvements, but you never see the improvements. I would question the legitimacy of how many factories have actually passed inspections that they say have passed inspections, and I would question that legitimacy.
So this is a really tough one. On a scale of 1 to 10.
That's why I'm saying being on the ground and actually seeing things is so important, to be there and see what's going on and experience what's going on, and not just read what the media says or what the government says or anything like that, because the on the ground is a lot different.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how optimistic are you that things will turn around, both in the near term and the long term? I know long term's harder to predict, but what?
Yeah, near term, I would like to be more optimistic, but you're probably 50-50. I mean, it's one way or the other, and I think really the only way that you're going to get a teeter in the right positive direction is if we, as the United States, step in and play a bigger part in helping bring both parties of the government, or I should say the government and the opposing party, together to clean the slate and start fresh and get free and fair elections up and running and turn Bangladesh back into a democratic society. It's not, it's not a democratic society. It's falling apart.
When I showed some transparency on what we were going to discuss in this hearing, as we're required to do, some tried to tell me I was all wet and I was moving in the wrong direction, and that things are wonderful, and the growth rate is phenomenal, and that everything is under control. And what we're hearing today is that's not accurate. Is that, I mean, Ms. Curtis, what do you think?
Yeah, first I just wanted to quickly comment. There is a U.S.-Bangladesh Business Council here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And I know Ms. Ayers and I were invited to speak about a year and a half ago when there were a lot of political tensions in the run-up to the January 2014 elections. And at that time, I would say there was about maybe 15 U.S. business representatives with interest in Bangladesh that were willing to join in a letter expressing their concerns about the political environment and how it was affecting business. So I think there's certainly
Did they do that?
interest. I think they did in the end. I don't know.
I'd love to get a copy of that letter if there's any way to do that. I mean,
Okay.
that'd be really helpful for my
Okay.
purposes.
We can follow up with that.
That'd be really helpful, because I think that, it's all about due process. I think that it's important for the business community to convey this is hurting you more than anybody, Bangladesh, and that if things don't turn around, there'll be a pretty, like you said, Mr. Fleischle, a pretty substantial exodus of economic opportunity, business, and that will only make things worse.
To be honest, I think the only thing that's really keeping any kind of growth aspect, if you want to call it that, in Bangladesh from an export standpoint is the fact that some form of GSP or tariff consideration is in place with Canada and Europe, and it's very significant. That's really the only thing that's a saving grace right now, because
Is it possible to get insure your product because of some of the security concerns?
you can insure your product, sure, yeah. I mean, that's definitely a possibility.
The
It's not
rates are probably going to
necessarily-
go through the
it's-
roof.
It's not necessarily the security of the product. It's, am I going to get the materials on time to make the product, to get it
Okay.
out the door on time,
Okay.
to meet the ship dates that the retailers are looking for?
Right.
Because if you don't meet those ship dates,
You
know,
lose.
consistently,
Yeah, you lose.
you lose the business and it
Yeah.
goes to somebody else. And if that consistently happens within a single country that you're importing from, it's time to look elsewhere. And I when I first started running the factories in 2007, and we started building a new factory in 2008, beautiful brand new factory in 2008, and we grew the business, from 0 to 40 million in 3 years is not, it's not an easy thing to do. And then to see what's happening today and to see the mass exodus of the business it's just discouraging. It really is, and it's saddening, because the workers in Bangladesh are so happy. They're so happy to have jobs. They're so happy to work. And that the situation there is such that, they're the ones that are getting impacted the worst.
Yes, Dr. Ayers.
A very quick supplement to that. If you look at the economic data, both for the garment industry in Bangladesh overall, despite all the political unrest in the last year, last year's Bangladesh fiscal year actually saw a growth in the garment industry by about 14%. Now, that is not going to be the case for this year, and we're going to start seeing that data come in. So that does explain why, if you look historically, the growth rate hadn't been ticking down.
it.
It is now beginning to tick down, so we're seeing that now.
That's very helpful. This has been a wonderful panel, and did you have another question? I was just going to say that if there's any closing comments that any of you would like to make, questions that haven't been asked, you think points that need to be made, then you're more than willing to make them, or more than happy to have you make them, Mr. Kansara.
Thank you. In addition to the question that Mr. Sherman asked about the parties, and I would say that the Hindu community also noted the severe security failings that that had taken place by the Awami League government as well as by police forces in protection in the run-up to the election of 2013 and 2014, as well as Washiko Rehman and Avijit Roy were killed in broad daylight with police very close nearby. Avijit Roy was killed at the Dhaka Book Fair, and police were within walking distance away. And when a machete-wielding assailant is killing you, it takes time. It is not. It's not a gunshot, and therefore the security forces failed. So, the Awami League should not simply rely on the Hindu community as a vote bank, because that is not their role. Their role is to protect all Bangladeshi citizens if they are in government, and the same with the BNP or any other party that's in power.
Any other comments?
Just a quick one on Avit Joy. There's actually a picture that I saw on the internet where Avit Joy was on the ground and the event was occurring, and there was a police officer standing right there doing nothing.
Wow.
Absolutely nothing. So just
Thank you. Ms. Kurtz, did you have one?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one last comment. It was raised earlier, the suggestion of declaring the Jamaat-e-Islami a foreign terrorist organization, and I think that would be extremely unhelpful. The Jamaat-e-Islami has participated in the electoral process. They have tended not to receive a great deal of votes. I think it was 4 to 5% in the last election that they ran in 2008. But the point is that certainly those guilty of violence should be prosecuted. But there is simply no indication that the Jamaat-e-Islami as a political party has engaged in terrorism, systematic terrorism.
Thank you. That's helpful. Dr. Ayers?
Very brief ending comment. For many years, I have always believed that Bangladesh provides a kind of living counterfactual to the problems that we see in a country like Pakistan. They obviously separated in 1971, but in the intervening decades, Bangladesh has gone on to deliver so much for its citizens. It has better human development indicators on almost every count than Pakistan does, and in fact, better than India in many counts as well. So for me, this is a huge opportunity and an opportunity cost. I believe it's important for the United States to stay engaged and not use sanctions as a means of trying to teach a lesson, but rather to try to shape the way we engage with Bangladesh and impress upon them how much potential they have and how we want to support that.
Would all of you agree with that idea? Okay, that's very helpful. You know, I want to say, I'm about to conclude the committee, but this committee hearing was not intended to just pile on. It really is about a constructive, better way. And it's not to cast aspersions on a country, but to liberate a people. It's about lifting, not pulling down. I mean, that's what we're trying to accomplish here. We're not trying to just throw rocks and criticize. What we're about is trying to shed some light on what the truth is. What is the truth beyond the spin zone? What's the truth, and what can America do to help improve the lives of the people of Bangladesh? And that's what this is about. So thank you so much for your patience, and thank you for your testimony. And without objection, the hearing is adjourned.